So in this video, I'm going to ask two questions. First is, are the cops allowed to strangle people? And the second question is, should the cops be allowed to strangle people? And again, these videos are designed to just provide my perspective on things as a former police officer and someone who studies police use of force. With all that's going on, I want people to have as much information as possible as they try to make heads or tails of what's going on. If you find this useful, please subscribe. So let's get into it. First thing is what do I mean by strangle? Is it okay for the police to strangle somebody? Should they be allowed to strangle somebody? And what does that mean? So there's a difference between strangling somebody and choking somebody. So when you strangle somebody, it means that you're cutting off the blood supply to or from their head, to or from the brain. And we're not sure why it happens exactly. We think we know. I've looked into it a little bit, tried to do some reading on it, and they're not really sure 100% on why this happens, but your body will shut down. If the blood supply is cut off, your body will shut down and you'll pass out. A lot of people have done this when they were kids, or if you've trained jujitsu, you maybe have encountered this where you didn't tap in time and you lose consciousness. To choke somebody, so that's strangling, is when you cut off the blood. To choke somebody is when you cut off the windpipe, so you block that windpipe. And that's choking somebody. You're obstructing that passage. So they're two different things. So let me just move to the Minneapolis use of force policy. So because George Floyd was strangled, it looked like he was being strangled when he died. I don't know if that was the cause of death. I don't know. That'll have to be the medical examiner that makes that determination. But based on my training and experience, when I observed the video, it looked to me as though he was being strangled, that the blood supply was being cut off to or from his brain, and that it continued to be cut off. Or I shouldn't say cut off because I don't know, but it appeared as though the officer's leg was in a position such that it had a high probability of obstructing blood flow either to or from the brain, might be a better way to say that. So let me just jump into the use of force policy that they have in Minneapolis. So they're very clear in the use of force policy what a chokehold is, and they say it's a deadly force option. So like using force to obstruct that passageway, that's a deadly force encounter. That's, like somebody's pointing a gun at me, they're trying to pull the trigger on close quarters, and I need to choke them block off the airway. That's the only time that's really acceptable, and that makes sense to me because it's a very dangerous procedure to obstruct the throat that way and choke somebody. It's very dangerous. So the neck restraint, they say there are basically two kinds of neck restraints that they work with as a law enforcement agency: the conscious neck restraint and the unconscious neck restraint and the unconscious neck restraint. So for them, they say a neck restraint it's when you compress either one or both sides of somebody's neck using your arm or your leg, and you're avoiding the trachea or the airway, and the goal is to inhibit the blood supply with the when you're trying to render them unconscious. If you're trying to maintain them conscious, you're applying pressure and you're trying to use it as like a control technique. So the department says there are two kinds: the conscious neck restraint. This is when you're not trying to render them unconscious, and you can do this when someone's actively resisting. So the person is using physical force to inhibit your ability to take them into custody. They're pushing your hands away, they're pushing the handcuffs away. According to this policy, as I read it, again, I'm not an attorney, that it sounds like they're saying that you can use this as not to put them unconscious, but as a way to control them, and manipulate them and control them through space and time. Okay. The unconscious neck restraint, they say that, so this is when you avoid the trachea or the airway, and you're restricting blood flow either to or from the brain on one side or the other using the arm or the leg. They're saying that the only time you can use that and attempt to render someone unconscious is they list several circumstances, but it's basically active aggression. So like they're punching, they're kicking, they're trying to hit you with something, and you've tried lesser means. So the Minneapolis Police Department is explicit in their policy to say that if you're going to use a neck restraint, other terms was like a rear naked choke, a blood choke. There's a bunch of different terms. They call it the unconscious neck restraint. That if you're going to do this, you have to have tried lower levels of use of force, and failed in those attempts. And this is something that you have been forced to resort to. They're explicit in the policy saying that if somebody's passively resisting, that you can't use a neck restraint. It's just very, very clear. And then based on the video that you see, the other videos that I posted here about with the George Floyd footage, it's very clear that if he is resisting and it's not just a medical issue, that resistance was like a passive resistance. And if there was any kind of active resistance, it was very minimal, difficult to detect, and occurred well before the video shows the application of that neck restraint using the leg. And the neck restraint that's being used in the video appears to be the unconscious neck restraint, utilizing the leg, and not in a way that I would use it. When I think of a leg being used to render someone unconscious using a neck restraint or a blood choke, I think of like a triangle choke. There's different positions, but pinning someone to the ground seems unusual, especially when they're handcuffed and not even engaging in passive resistance. He was, as far as I could tell, compliant at that point. There was nothing, he wasn't in a position to do anything. And then another thing that is notable in the use of force policy out there in Minneapolis is there are pretty clear aftercare guidelines. So after this has been applied to somebody, and also this is something that you're only supposed to utilize if you've been specially trained for it, another sign that they recognize the danger in using something like this, that there are steps that you need to you need to get medical care, you need to look out for this person because it's dangerous. So that's basically how Minneapolis handles it. They have the two types. They're explicit when you can and can't use it. Now the second question, that's the first question, can they strangle you? Yes, so police officers can strangle you. And there are instances when then it is in policy in certain agencies, and this in Minneapolis, that they could strangle you. Certainly not in the George Floyd case, absolutely not. I don't see any justification for utilizing it then, but in other circumstances, it does appear as though that in Minneapolis, yes, they can do that. Now the second question, should police departments be able to strangle people? So it's a difficult question to answer, and it's a subjective question. So different people are going to have different opinions. And I think a way I would answer it is to come up with a hypothetical. So I have a son, he's 15, and he's a big kid. There's a little bit of wrestling, a little bit of boxing. So he could be a handful. He's like 6'2", he's a big kid. And I'd imagine him in a few years at college and had a few beers, and he's being a bit of an idiot and is intoxicated and becomes involved in a physical fight. And the police show up and they are trying to control him, and he's acting like an idiot, which I hope nothing like this would ever happen. And he starts throwing punches at the cops. How would I want the police to handle that situation? Would I want them to hit him with a baton? Would I want them to out on the street throwing strikes and punching him if he's engaged in active aggression against the police, and maybe using less than lethal weapons, or punching him, something like that? Would I want that, or would I rather have an officer who is skilled in new jiu-jitsu and was well trained and practiced to slip in get their hooks in and give him a rear naked choke and render him incapacitate and briefly put him in handcuffs? I don't know. I would tend to say I would prefer that to him taking a baton across the side of the head, or getting punched in the face by police officers, or being involved in some long drawn out fight where he may lunge for their weapon and end up being shot. Let's say for his safety and the officers, having, and not all situations, but having that as a tool with a competent professional police officer, I would be okay with that being utilized over some other tactics, if that makes sense. So it's a difficult question to answer, but I would argue that yes, police officers should have that as a tool in their tool belt, but that tool should be restricted by policy, and that those policies should be enforced, and there should be legal sanctions when it's that these techniques are utilized to assault people or to murder people like they did in Minneapolis. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to do more videos on police use of force and policy issues. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, throw them down in the comment section or hit me up on Twitter. I'd love to incorporate your questions into these videos. Please like and subscribe. The more you subscribe, the more people that will be able to view these. And again, I'm hoping that by providing this information, it will enable us, all of us, to make better decisions about how we want to move forward with criminal justice reform in the United States. Thank you very much.